Hello from the Lighthouse. I am back with another review video. This is a review of the film The 24th. I previously recorded my reaction to the film and I lost the entire recording, so I'm starting over and we will start by going over the 24th and how it came to be, how this movie came into creation. It was written by Kevin Wilmot and Trey Byers, also directed by Kevin Wilmot. I had a chance to check the internet really quickly before posting this or giving my reaction, and he mentioned that he came across a photo of a hearing involving soldiers of the 24th unit of the military, U.S. military. These are also known as Buffalo Soldiers, and that caption on the photo that he saw intrigued him. He started doing some research and learned of the Houston, what it's called the Houston Race Riot of August 23rd, 1917. The film, my first internal response was wow. Powerful acting. The cast just really brought it home for me. Trey Byers, shout out to him. He played the character of William Boston excellently. I was totally sold into the action of this film, into the feelings, into the peril that these soldiers were facing during the film. It's quite a star packed cast actually. In addition to Mr. Byers, there's Asia, Naomi King, Michael T. Williams, Sam Momek Ray, and other familiar faces that once you start watching it, you will recall them from other films and TV projects. So, as I said, my initial reaction to this film is wow. It is history I wasn't aware of, didn't know anything about. It is powerfully acted and it moves, it's gripping. The story moves along, it keeps you engaged, you care about the characters. So we're going to get into this review. I'm going to start by reading because this story does harken back to an actual event in history. I'm going to read a brief excerpt from an article I found on doughboy.org. It says it began in July 1917, following America declaring war on Germany and entering World War I. The 3rd Battalion of the 24th United States Infantry, a predominantly black unit, was sent to guard the construction of Camp Logan, part of the new war effort on the edge of Houston. And so that's the backdrop for our story. We enter the film with the soldiers arriving at Camp Logan and getting to know one another. I mean, it is a film about soldiers, so the soldiers are testing each other, they're forming their friendships, they're getting to know one another, know the backstories. A lot of information there about how each of them is responding to being a soldier, wanting to participate fully as American citizens, but also being put in a situation where they're treated like second class soldiers, from the soldiers to their commanders, who is trying to ask for them to be commissioned to actually go to the front, to the French front, and being denied that and being labeled as inferior and only worth doing the labor, but not actually doing the fighting, and not being able to participate in, at that time, the ethos of bringing democracy and freedom to the world. So you have that as a subtext going on. You have, as I said, you're being introduced to the characters, and they are composites because this situation involved even more soldiers than are shown in the film. The film, of course, is telling a story. It's not trying to be a documentary, but I do believe that there are some composites, and as you said, it's inspired by true stories. So the soldiers that are presented give us a overall picture of how different African American men responded to the segregation and the disparate treatment in the military, even when they were giving their all and giving their best to move the efforts forward, to move the fighting forward, and to participate fully. In addition to that portion of the soldiers just dealing with being in the army and having a command structure that is not valuing what they can bring, you also have the situation that they're dropped into Jim Crow, Houston, Texas in 1917. And these men have faced their own stories of racism from wherever they came from. There wasn't any place in the United States where I would believe there would be absolutely no racism. But they are dropped into this hostile environment in Houston, Texas, where the local police force and the locals were not welcoming. They were not wanting to see soldiers or black men in uniform. They were hostile and violent toward them. And so the soldiers, as they're coming into this situation, some of them having served in previous wars. In one of the scenes, there is a reference to serving in at the Battle of San Juan Hill, and serving with Teddy Roosevelt, and then after having distinguished themselves in that kind of service, being reduced to basically being the construction team or guards for the camp instead of actual fighting soldiers. So we follow the story largely through the perspective of Sergeant William Boston. He is a highly educated black man who had who had been to France and had come back because he did want to continue the legacy of his family and distinguish himself and work with the black soldiers of that time, because the units were segregated at this time in 1917. He is being used to give the men perspective, to give them a bigger view. The commanding officer wants these soldiers to be placed in combat. He wants them to have that opportunity, but he's using, and not in a negative way, but he's letting uh, Boston know that you can set an example, that they will, you're the kind of presence that they will follow. And so he sets him up in a way to show them how it's done, to someone who won't be too much of a wild card in the context of the Jim Crow segregation. And Mr. Boston puts up a valiant effort to do that, but the soldiers are under so much oppression and just constantly being defiled, being treated in vulgar ways, being spoken to foully, just being attacked and bullied everywhere they go, and beyond bullying, because the violence visited on them was quite harsh. And so we follow their story as they are interacting with the people of Houston. And among all of these forces that are just kind of crushing in on these soldiers, uh, Sergeant Boston meets Marie, who is played by Asia Naomi King. And so, in the context of the story, we do get to have some levity, a little bit of romance, where these two are telling their story. They find refuge in each other, and they also point to how the Jim Crow South and all that was being done by the Europeans there not only affected the base life, the town life, and even to the intimate relationships of these people, because she is wanting him to be safe. He wants to protect her, but he also is torn by wanting to be by his commitment to the soldiers. In one scene of violence, prior to the actual what they call the race riot, there was a character named Joe who explained to Sergeant Boston why during an altercation with some European of the town, he actually walked away from the altercation rather than engage or try to help his fellow soldiers. In that particular instance, someone did lose their life, and Sergeant Boston and a few other soldiers were responding to the scene and attempting to take um, the shooter in. The shooter, he admitted he wasn't a shooter. I'm sorry, he stabbed the man, but he did admit that he stabbed him, and he felt perfectly justified and felt that nothing would be done to him in the Jim Crow South. And during this altercation, it was very testy. Weapons were brandished, and it was a standoff, with the black soldiers being outnumbered by the European townspeople. Joe, the character Joe, walked away, and later Boston speaks to him about that situation, and Joe explains to Boston that he had witnessed the East St. Louis riots. Now, the East St. Louis riots occurred on July 2nd, 1917, in East St. Louis, Illinois. I have actually been to East St. Louis, and I did a tour. Would be the best way that I can describe it. They have in the city of East St. Louis 24 sacred sites and historical markers across the city, and each of those markers is indicating what happened at that scene, the important people who were involved and who did live at the location at the time of the riots. I went to most of the sites. We didn't get to every single site, but we did get to quite a few of them. I think we may have missed two or three, maybe two. And in that, the size of the mob violence is extraordinary. It's mind boggling, because we were in a vehicle, and even for us to travel from site to site, and this happened in a period of 1 to 2 days in 1917. All of this violence and all of the things that were happening, and the people trying to get away from the mob, from the violence, and it is a vast area where this occurs. So it's not like one street. This is We are driving for quite a bit to get to all of these sites. So just the scale of that riot, and to think that this character Joe experienced that it would say like July 1917, and this race riot in Houston occurs August 23rd, 1917. You can see that he's obviously traumatized by it, and as he's tells the story of what happened to him and what he saw, he was just like, I'm so afraid, I can't move. And against that is the backdrop of where we are getting the scope of the fear that these soldiers have, being surrounded like this and being told by their commanding officers not to defend themselves with arms, basically to go out naked, though they're soldiers. And to that context, I will put a link, that I found on Britannica.com, of massacres and race riots that occurred in the United States. And there had been a number prior to 1917. So, this kind of pogrom violence that was happening in the United States, they would have been aware of this, that these things have happened, and wary of that happening to them. So we don't make excuses for any kind of violent action against the innocent, but we do have to acknowledge that in the context of what they were living with, violent, openly hostile, openly violent police force using weapons, killing people, actively killing people, and willing to do more, that they were justifiably felt threatened and felt a need to defend themselves. So Joe has already informed the character of William Boston of that experience that he had, and the story is going forward, dealing with the relationship between Mr. Boston and Marie, who is the love interest. And in the course of that, there's an altercation in the city of Houston, and a soldier is taken by two police officers in the context of the film. And Boston is attempting to, ask for this gentleman to be turned over to him. It escalates from there. He is in prison and eventually released to the commanding officer at the camp at Camp Logan. This commanding officer is was the second in command when Boston and the 24th Infantry arrived. They were commanded by a much more sympathetic commanding officer, a colonel, who was advocating for the soldiers to fight in France, to fight on the front. However, the segregated military and the commanding officers above him were unwilling. They were relegating the soldiers to laborers, construction workers, rather than being active soldiers and being able to use the military issued weapons. So by this time, that colonel is no longer available to provide the protection that they are accustomed to, where he kind of makes a it's a stressful truce, but a truce with the local city, like I would say, maybe like a police commissioner or someone of that stature who could assist with, making sure that the police force in the town was a bit more restrained, bit more reined in, and not just wreaking havoc on these unarmed soldiers as they're going about their work and as they are entering the town to basically live their lives. The second in command is not as sympathetic to the black soldiers. He does appear to have a place for them, and that place is beneath him as a European male. And so he does arrive at the town, and he returns um, Sergeant Boston back to the camp. And when he arrives, the other soldiers see what has happened to him. They are unaware of the fate of the other soldier who was attacked while in the city, believing him to be dead, believing that other soldier to be dead, and being warned of mob violence, they set out to defend themselves. The commanding officer lets them know through their sergeant, played by Michael T. Williamson, giving another awesome performance, that the soldiers are to return all weapons to the armory and basically stand down. They do this, and then rumors get back to them that there is a mob on the way, and rather than be sitting ducks, and this is how we will look at it from the movie, rather than be sitting ducks, they break into the armory, take the weapons, and prepare to defend themselves. In the course of this, they enter the city proper of Houston, and they fire upon the police officers who've been brutalizing them, and and then there are some bystanders who are also um, killed due to this violence. And in addition to that, there were a few soldiers who were killed. So, all in all, the violence, the defending themselves at night in basically a storm, uh, they were not able to identify friend from foe, and they did kill like I believe there were three or four military men in a vehicle. They did let a couple pass, but those that they thought to be a threat to them, they did fire upon. They were caught relatively quickly. I mean, there really wasn't really anywhere for them to go, so they had gone back toward the camp. Back to Camp Logan. They were apprehended very quickly by the military and taken to trial. Before the trial, there is a scene with the former commanding officer. He comes back to speak to Mr. Boston, and they have just this phenomenal exchange where Trey Byers' character in Mr. Boston is explaining to him what it is like to be how it is, what they're feeling in the Jim Crow South, with the military treating them like they are lesser than, by being called boy, even as they are soldiers, being trained, and you're still calling them boy. And so he explains that to him, and he just gives a phenomenal performance. And I will say, Mr. Byers has an amazing voice. I really like to hear his voice. It's just something. I mean, it's his natural voice. It isn't something he is doing. It's just his natural voice is a really great voice to listen to, and the delivery of the lines. It is beautiful. It is moving. I'm totally bought in. I'm totally sold. I'm in there. As I said, McKelty Williamson is always bringing an A game, and there's this scene where he is. I mean, just he's doing all the things to kind of dress down uh, Sergeant Boston, and it's just a really good one to see. The actors just came with it on this one. So in the end, there was punishment. There was severe punishment from the military for the actions that occurred in the Houston riot. I actually think there's a better word for it, because I don't think of it as, I don't like saying riot. I think the proper term would be pogrom, because they, in this case, they're defending themselves, but a lot of what they call like the East St. Louis riot, they were just being attacked by a mob. And in this case, in Houston, the soldiers were being told, or the rumor was, there's a mob coming to get you, and they were responding to that threat. And at that particular time, there was not a mob, but they didn't know it at the time. They did find out later, but they were responding to a very credible threat for the 1917 time period, and all that they had been through as soldiers, as living in the Jim Crow South, and living in the United States, period, because these types of mob violence against Black communities was not new, and they had happened several times before this and continued after this event. The story, as I said, is inspired by a true story. So I did look up a few articles about it. One article, I have listed those below. One in particular says that the Army set aside the World War I convictions of 110 Black soldiers convicted in 1917 Houston riots. There is a plaque, or a marker, for where Camp Logan was located. That is in Houston, Texas. There is a book written about this event in history, and I'll also put that below. I have not read the book, but it was listed when I started just kind of looking into the backstory of the Houston race riots. So that's some great information to start with, and you can continue researching. The director mentioned that this was a little known event in history, a little known race riot, so to speak. And so he brought this to light. He wanted to tell this story. And as I said, the cast is phenomenal. The acting, it is spot on. It is giving me all of the emotional range that I would expect of people living under violence perpetually. They are just constantly facing a violent group of people, and they are having to try to live their lives within that, in the context of the work that they do, the legacy that they want to leave, in their intimate relationships, in their just going about their daily lives, and how they're constantly under attack, just walking and going to something as simple as a meeting with townsfolk. Um, the movie explores topics on honor, what it means to be respected, how you see people, as a human, or as an object, as are objectifying them, and making and reducing people down to just a color, versus seeing the humanity in that person. And so it explores that, and it hits hard on those themes of what is honorable, what is right, being on the side of one's people, of the challenges of trying to advance in a very hostile system where to advance you have to lay aside your truest convictions in order to move forward. And in the case of Mr. Boston, he was having to lay aside what he wanted to do, which was stay among the black soldiers in order to stay safe. His commanding officer, his love interest, gave him very clear message that it is not safe for you, and you need to go to a situation that is safer. And that was driving his choices before he could make that change. However, the Houston race riot did occur. At the end of the film, we get a message from Mr. Boston to Marie, and he's explaining to her why he did what he did and why he stayed and why he didn't run. And I mean, it is moving, it is touching, it is a sincere performance, and I really left the film feeling like I was stepped into someone else's story. So great storytelling. I totally recommend watching this one. There is quite a bit of violence in it, so parents may not want to watch this with children of a certain age. But it is a great film. It's beautifully done. The costumes are, I mean, you get that feeling of just how heavy this fabric was. It's 1917, and you're talking about Buffalo soldiers. They're out in Houston. I mean, it really takes you to that time period. So I say bravo. I hope you will watch this movie, learn a little bit more about this story. You can use some of the links that I'll put in below to continue or to start your research and go from there. I thank you for listening to this Lighthouse production. It's just a quick review of the films that I am coming across. And thank you for watching. Please like, and I'll speak with you at the next post for the Lighthouse. You have a great day. Goodbye.